Who is going to pay for a new tax on retirement savings? And is it actually fair? At first glance, it sounds straightforward, an extra tax aimed at the wealthy. The government's plan is to increase the amount they take from a small number of people with bigger super balances than most of us. And this isn't new. It's the plan Labor took to the last election, which they won. But we're still talking about it. Compulsory super, where your employer is required to set aside money in a fund for your retirement, was originally created to even the playing field, to make sure any Australian on any income could have a good retirement. And in some ways, it's achieved that.
We're all in this together.
But people who are never going to struggle to fund their retirement have also figured out that this system, which has lower tax rates than the rest of the system, is an incredibly good tax avoidance and wealth creation machine.
So what is the super tax? Who is on the hook, and is it reasonable? Has super morphed into something it was never meant to be? And is there such a thing as too much super?
What time is it on the play school clock?
Superannuation is a vital subject. It's also one that often puzzles us or even bores us witless.
To understand why this change is controversial, we have to go back to the 80s,
when this guy, Paul Keating, was the Treasurer.
For the next 2 months, the superannuation message, will be everywhere.
At that time, super was only really available to the wealthy.
Unless we can move, and move rapidly, we will condemn an entire generation of elderly people to an unsatisfactory and poorly provided retirement.
When compulsory super was legislated, it was done to make retirement fairer, even for people who couldn't save much.
But also because the government was worried about the baby boomer generation. Once the last of the baby boomers hit retirement age in 2031, there's projected to be 3 retirees for every 10 working people, putting a big burden on younger workers.
To incentivise workers to tip more of their money into super, in addition to the mandatory amount that comes out of the worker's paycheck, the government came up with tax discounts. It means that super is usually taxed less than regular income when it goes into your super fund. The interest your money earns while in the super fund is also taxed at a lower rate. And crucially, there's no extra tax applied when you pull it out of your super at retirement. This system has worked for lots of people.
But in its current form, the wealthiest 10% of Australians are benefiting the most, with 2/3 of the tax breaks going to the highest earners.
Critics of the scheme say the tax discounts are too generous and help people who don't need help to fund their retirement. This is Company Ken.
Hello. He earns $250,000 a year. The portion of his salary over $190,000, which is the top tax bracket, is taxed at 45%, but the super contributions from his employer is taxed at a discounted rate of 15%. And Ken has spare cash, so he elects to tip extra money into his super, increasing the amount of his cash that avoids the high income tax rate. Then Ken also signs up to what's called a self-managed super fund, and that means he can keep his assets in his super fund, not just cash. He puts the house he owns on the Gold Coast into his super fund as well, and the rental income he makes from this property is also taxed at the lower rate, as long as it stays in his super account until retirement.
The change that Labor is proposing targets people who are using the system like Ken at the very upper end of the wealth scale in Australia. It would double the tax rate for superannuation earnings from 15% to 30% for the portion above $3 million in a super balance. And controversially, this would also include unrealised gains. When you buy an asset or you invest in stocks, you hope the value goes up. We know this as a capital gain. If you sell that asset, the capital gain becomes a realised gain, aka real money. But if you don't sell, although you own something that has increased in value, it's an unrealised gain. You don't actually have the extra cash to show for it.
Once, twice, third time at 1,660,000 we sell away, going. Welcome home. Sold, congratulations.
This new super tax proposes to tax unrealised gains on assets in self-managed super funds with $3 million or more, as well as realised gains.
So for balances above $3 million, people will have to pay tax every time the value of the asset goes up, even if they're not selling. If you have money in a savings account separate to your superannuation, this probably isn't a big issue. But one group who may be caught out is farmers, who've put their whole farm into a self-managed super fund. As the value of land increases, the value of their farm grows, which is an unrealised gain. If their farm is worth $3 million or more, the unrealised gains the land makes over the threshold will be taxed at the higher rate of 30%. Some farmers say they can't pay that higher tax bill and would have to sell off parts of their farm to afford it. So back to Ken, who is about to retire.
He's got $8 million in his super and has added 2 more houses to his superannuation investment portfolio. In 1 year, the value of his properties goes up and he makes interest on the cash in the fund. Combined, that increases the value of his super fund by $500,000. And under these super tax changes, the gains he made in that year directly from the amount over the $3 million threshold are taxed at the higher rate of 30% instead of 15%. And this amounts to $48,500. And actually, that's still a good deal, at 9.7% of the $500,000, which would have been higher if it was sitting outside the super fund and subject to income tax. And it's good for his kids. Super tax breaks means wealthy people can save more than they need for retirement, which is passed on to their children as a sort of subsidised inheritance.
It's plausible that $3 million sounds like a lot more than you or I might ever have in our super account. And if that's true, there would be no impact to your super.
Critics claim failing to take inflation into account is unfair, but some economists say the vast majority of people currently working will never have more than $3 million in their super.
$3 million is a lot now, but in 20, 30 or 40 years' time, it won't be worth as much. And more people will have to pay the hiked 30% rate.
By 2040, assuming a normal level of inflation, it would effectively be $2 million, but that's still a lot of super.
The peak body for superannuation reckons the magic number for a pretty great retirement, including international holidays and dinners out, is $690,000 for a couple or $595,000 for a single person. As of right now, there's only 80,000 Australians who have enough super to be affected by this change. They're in the top 0.5% and mostly above retirement age. The question being asked here is, what is the super system for, and who should be allowed to benefit? The government says this small change would raise about $2 billion in the first year, and that's nothing to sniff at. It could fund things like schools, hospitals and roads. But it does mean dipping into the retirement funds of Australians. So far, the Coalition have been against it, mostly because they don't think it should apply to unrealised gains. They've also been saying that a change like this would leave the door open to further changes in the super system.
The Greens could be an ally for Labor, but they want the tax to apply to anyone with $2 million in super, not $3 million, and they want it indexed to inflation.
So, is this a super tax or is it super unfair? What do you think, Ken?